Get the Intel, the podcast meant for those of us trying to find out what the hell is going on in the field. Here, we discuss tools, techniques, and approaches that you can implement to streamline operations and let you focus on your craft.
Hello, I'm Chad Gill. I'm the host of the Get the Intel podcast, where I talk with leaders in contracting, management, and anyone helping us do business better. This episode is brought to you by Workforce Recon. Workforce Recon is a project tracking software that connects the office to the field. Their app, Field Recon, is built with a field-first mentality, developed by contractors for contractors. It includes time and asset tracking, messaging, job documentation, and scheduling all in one place. So if you're tired of finding out what happened days later, check us out at workforcerecon.com and see your operations in real time. So joining me today is Brault. He's a best-selling author, speaker, and leadership coach, as well as the former chairman of the board for EO. He's a lifelong entrepreneur who has owned multiple companies for many years, including Pure Solutions and Advanced Facilities Services International, which he sold in 2014. So Brian, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time and kind of letting us glean a little bit of your knowledge.
Oh, thanks, Chad. Glad to be here.
So just kind of how did you get started? Where you did kind of the brief of where you started and where you went.
So in business, how I got started? Yeah, great. During my senior year of undergraduate at the University of Buffalo studying business, I applied for some jobs, and quite honestly, the job offers I got offered to pay me less money than I was making putting myself through school. So I thought, yeah, there's got to be better offers out there. So I thought, well, what if I got my MBA? That will help me. So I got an assistantship to study for my MBA. So for the first time in my life, I didn't have to earn money for school. So I had a summer off, and I decided that in one of my senior year business classes, I had to design a business on paper. And back then, vinyl siding was relatively new, and it was supposed to be totally maintenance free. So there was, I would walk my way to college every morning, and there was this one building that had vinyl siding on it. And I walked up one day because it looked dirty, and I just ran my finger across it and thought, wow, that's just on the surface. That should come off pretty easy. So I decided we'd start this power washing business. Now, back in 1986, power washing wasn't a real big thing yet. And so I took $500 I got from graduation, went and bought a power washer and some, a ladder, some scrub brushes, things, and soap, and decided I would open up a house washing business for the summer. And then when school started in the fall, I'd close it down and be done. Well, I washed one house that whole summer, cut lawns, clean gutters, did all sorts of other things, but I washed one house that summer. But then right before school started, I approached a grocery store chain about power washing one of their storefronts. And they had trouble getting people to successfully do that. And so I went and I just tested a corner to see how well I thought I could do. And it came off really easy. So I met the guy. I had this old beat up pickup truck that happened to be my girlfriend's at the time. She's now my wife. And we've gotten rid of that truck. But I was so beat up and looked so unprofessional. I parked it around the corner and carried all my stuff so he wouldn't see any of that. And so I did this demonstration for him. He said, wow, that looks great. How much? And I told him $300. I thought that was all the money in the world. Well, it took me 300 hours to do the job. So it ended up costing me, I got paid a whopping $1 an hour. And even back then, that was not a lot of money. What happened was, coincidentally, where I did this little test spot and where I did something for him must have been the easiest places on the whole storefront to clean, because everything else was significantly harder and higher up and all sorts of things. But he loved what I did and just started giving me work. He asked me to price that job and the very next job. And then for about 6 years, Chad, he never asked me to price another job. So I took a risk on the first 2 jobs. But then from that point on, he always said, I need you to do this. He knew my pricing was fair. And so I was able to invoice him afterwards based on what I thought the job was worth. And it was always cheaper than what he probably would have paid. but it was better than what I would have bid. So I was able to build a business based on just a relationship between, a facilities guy and me, and just me helping him look good because we were addressing things that previously they weren't able to address. And I was able to kind of build a business. So I did start my MBA for a semester, and I was starting this other business at the same time. And some of that work, required me to work overnight. And I started to learn really quickly that working overnight and then trying to get your MBA during the day didn't work very well. So I thought, you know what? School will always be here. Let me set that aside. Let me go into building this business, and then I'll come back to school. Well, that was probably 34 years ago now, maybe even more, 36 years ago now. And I never went back to school.
It's still there.
It is. It's still there.
That's right. Exactly. Because that's what we all want to do now, get back to school.
Yeah.
Go back to college. I don't know about taking the classes again, but college looked pretty good. It's a pretty good life.
Yes, that's right.
I didn't even have a real college experience. I went to Virginia Military Institute, so I knew that I probably wouldn't have made it in a regular college. So that one worked out well for me.
Yeah. Awesome.
But no, I enjoyed it. So I joined EO, and I know the Entrepreneurs Organization has been a big part of your growth and something that, obviously you have put a tremendous amount of time into it. What brought you to EO?
Great question. So when I was starting this business, there was a guy who owned a hardware and rental store down the street from where I lived when I was in college. And he had started his business about a year or two before I started mine. And so, I was buying supplies from him, tools from him, renting power washers and scaffolding and things like that from him. And we just always used to love to talk about business. And flash forward a few years, he actually was awarded the National Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. President Bush is the one who gave him the award. So he was the national winner. He came to me and said, hey, you should, there's this EO thing. We should go take a look at it. So we went, he joined, I didn't. A year later, he came to me and said, hey, listen, I think you really should take a look at this again. And so I went. And at that point, I had been in business, I guess, about 13 years. And I 13, 14 years, and I had somewhat plateaued off. I qualified for EO, but I had been there for a little bit, and I didn't really know how I was going to get myself to the next level. So when I was going to this meeting, they talked about all these different learning programs they offered that would help you learn how to build a better business or a bigger business. And I thought, well, maybe this is the thing. I was still kind of hemming and hawing, and I can remember sitting on this guardrail outside this restaurant. We had this meeting, and he said, you know what? He said, you're overthinking this. He said, just do it. He said, if you don't like it after a year, you can leave. Well, it just set me on a course, and I've been in EO. Next month, it'll be 21 years. And it totally changed my life, Chad. It got me to think about a business differently. It opened my eyes to, I was thinking small, and it really helped me look at things different. It helped me. So I joined to build a bigger business. And so I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to just jump in with both feet. So I went to every single learning event I could go to, even if the title didn't necessarily sound like something I needed to learn. I just went. I just wanted to learn everything I could. I started going to regional learning events and global learning events. I got involved in the executive education program. So I applied for the Entrepreneurial Masters Program, and I didn't get in. I applied again the next year, and I got in. What I learned, Chad, really along that route was just a different way to think about business. I started thinking about really bringing on high quality people to build a strong team. And I, for the first time, heard about that concept of the right people, on the bus in the right seats. And I started to really recognize the value of bringing on strong, competent people and empowering them to become leaders. I started using open book management, where I identified the numbers that people really needed to understand that they impacted, and started opening my books to those numbers to share with those people. We really started recruiting and hiring and retaining top talent through a system that is now called the WHO method. At the time, it was called the top grading method. And we also started building strategic plans. We identified our core values and our vision and our mission, and started bringing all the people together. And I realized what my job is as the leader is to help everyone answer these three questions: where are we going? What do we need to do to get there? And what is my role? And where are we going is that vision, that clearly defined vision. What do we need to do to get there is that strategic plan. And so I would bring, a lot of people from my company together to really develop the strategic plan to reach that vision. And then everyone in the company knew what their role was in executing on that plan. And all of a sudden, in the first 4 years of being in EO, I scaled my business by a factor of 8. So we went from $1.5 million to 12 million in 4 years, 300 employees. We were doing work consistently in 4 different states. And there was some hiccups along the way. I started to build the business that I dreamed of building, and then all of a sudden fell out of love with it. And what do I mean by that? I built this business, this visionary entrepreneurial business, all of a sudden became something of substance that now needed to be run. And running a business is very different than building a business. And so what I realized is all of a sudden I needed to manage systems and processes, and I just don't enjoy doing that. And I'm okay at it if I'm being generous to myself, but I don't love doing it. And so one day I walked into work and looked at my agenda for the day and calendar and realized I didn't want to do anything that I had scheduled that day. I mean, I had, a meeting with an operations manager about a challenge he was having with one of his key people. I had a meeting with our HR person to approve a new compensation structure. I had a meeting with the chief operating officer and the accounting person to discuss budgets. And I'm like, I didn't want to do any of that. And so that started me on a journey. At first I started to look to sell the business, and then I, through EO, started to develop a whole different approach, which we can talk about later. But it really changed the way I looked at my business.
That's pretty interesting. Does that story come in with you hiring a CEO and just becoming more of a strictly visionary, or? Because I think that happens to a lot of people, that the building is exciting and fun. And I've been through phases of that too. And then sometimes it's the holding people accountable. It's the day-to-day operations that, we're not good at. There's farmers and hunters, and, you need a farmer.
Yep, exactly. So what I did, I realized that I loved being the visionary and I loved building businesses. I also started to recognize through a lot of experiences that I had been having in the Entrepreneurs Organization is that I think a lot of people have an entrepreneurial spirit in them. Just so many people never act on it. And so what I did is we had 5 areas of business, and then we had a Florida division. So we created the Florida division as a separate entity, not legally, but as a separate entity within our overall structure. And then we had 5 different lines of business up north, that the types of businesses that we provided. And what we did is we created 6 like individual little mini companies, so to speak. And each general manager was really empowered to be an entrepreneur of that area of business. And what we did is we provided accounting services for everyone, HR support for everyone, and administrative support. And so they had company support in those areas, but then other than that, they ran that business themselves. They developed their own budgets. They requested funding through us for things. They really had the ultimate decision on who they hired and who they fired, as long as they followed legal guidelines. They had to deal with all the sales and marketing and really deal directly with their customers. And the one rule is they could make any decision unless they were going to tell a customer no. If they were going to tell a customer no, they just needed to come talk to me. Other than that, we had very specific metrics and KPIs in place. We used to literally every day of the month they would reforecast their revenue and profitability for the month. That sounds crazy, and it sounds like a lot of work. It was actually pretty easy. You did your work up front. Maybe 2/3 of your work was contractual work, so that was easy. You knew your base number, and then you just added in there what jobs you knew were coming in that month, what your revenue was, what your expected expenses were, and then your profitability. And so once that was done, the only thing you needed to do every day was adjust either jobs that went away or got postponed, or new jobs that came on, and you were bidding them anyway. So you were just plugging those numbers in, and you had administrative support to help. But what it did is it just gave a really good handle for those managers to know exactly where they were every day in their business. And when I sold that business, I can remember packing up a box and seeing, and I forget, it was the overall company that we were doing about 12 million. And so it was $1 million a month. And I looked at what we had, all the people together had said their revenue was going to be for the month and the profitability by the end of and then I looked at where it was actually at the end of the month. And it was fascinating. It was $15,000 off between the beginning of the month and the end of the month on what they predicted. It was really, really powerful. It was a fun company to be with, because I wasn't the one responsible for running the business. I was leading the business. And I had these 6 entrepreneurs that worked with me. And then there was a chief operating officer, a chief financial officer that worked with me as part of a leadership team. But it was just, it was a fun time.
Gosh, so where to start? One, I love the story about the power wash, the mindset of, I'm walking down the street and you see opportunities and stuff like that. I finished the interview earlier this week with a gentleman. He said that's a big part of it. It's just the mindset of looking for opportunity in the midst of trouble and downturns. It's good days, bad days, all of them have opportunities in them. And I think that's something that is just part of being an entrepreneur, and then the courage to act on it. We're not everybody's built that way, and that's okay. It's a good thing that they're not.
Right.
So when you're talking about hiring the right people, I talk to other business owners and you're like, yeah, I would hire the right person. But when you're trying to do, you're like, hey, I need to get a high quality person that can run this business for me and make it grow. Do you have to be able to, and this sounds a little weird, but do you have to be able to afford them before you get them, or do you get them so that you can afford them? If that makes sense.
So I guess my bias would be is you get them so that you can afford them. I think it's kind of entrepreneurial again in a way. I mean, it's difficult because so often and let's put it this way. It wasn't always that way. When I started out, I realized I need to wait till I can afford them. And I worked my butt off to get there and then brought someone on. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, if I hire the right people and I empower them and incent them the right way, they're probably going to do at least 80, 85, 90% as well as I would. And yet in some cases, they would do better than I would, because some of the businesses we started to get into, I didn't really know the business. I mean, I wasn't skilled in running. I mean, I could run a business, but I wasn't skilled in knowing technically the services that we provided. When we started getting into like construction and electrical work and refrigeration work for grocery store chains, I didn't know how to do any of that. And most of the way I built the business is I used to do a lot of that. So I never asked someone to do something that I hadn't done. And there was some pretty cruddy jobs we did over the years. So people knew that I was willing to, roll up my sleeves and, clean up sewage or, clean up, a dumpster turned over and, cleaning up stuff that had been sitting in a grocery store dumpster for a month, and I was willing to do that, murder scenes, whatever. So they knew that I was willing to do anything. You wouldn't want me trying to fix refrigeration stuff. You wouldn't want me trying to, build out a new tenant space in a shopping center. But besides that, and Chad, for the life of me, you asked me a great question and I started rambling and totally lost where I was going.
I think you did answer it. And I talk with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think you and I have a similar approach on that. That an assistant is is just key to allowing you to grow. I think that's a huge thing, and it's always the reluctance. And I had it myself. I'm trying to figure out, man, how can I afford to pay somebody to do these things? And if you worked 40 hours a week, $100,000 a year is $20 an hour or whatever it is. But you have to sub that stuff out. You have to give that work. You have to delegate that work. But then I talk to entrepreneurs like, well, man, I can't afford an assistant. There's no way I can afford an assistant. But what do you say to people when you're saying something like that? Or I can't afford to hire a general manager. I can, but how do you convince them, or what do you tell them to kind of get them over the hump to say, it isn't about, you can't afford not to.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things, and I guess the one point is, listen, if you want to stay the size you are, and you're happy with your life, then don't change anything. But if you want to change something about your life, you need to change how you're doing it. And what I will tell people is, if you do not have an executive assistant, you are one.
Yeah.
You're just, the job's getting done, probably not nearly as well as it would be for someone who's trained that way and they think that way, and it's all they're focusing on, versus you as the business owner trying to spin a lot of plates at the same time. And there's the concept called zone of genius, and it's really the highest level of 4 different zones. One is the zone of incompetence, so it's things that you don't really know how to do, and so you shouldn't try to do them. Then there's the zone of competence, which you know how to do, but it's probably not the best use of your time. So in other words, Chad, you as the CEO of your company, you may be great at cleaning toilets. You can make a bathroom look amazing, but it's probably not where you're adding the most value to your company, spending your time cleaning toilets. You can be the visionary, growing your business in other ways, and you can hire someone to, do the janitorial cleaning at your office. So that's your zone of competence. It's something you know how to do, but probably not the best use of your time. Then comes along probably the most dangerous zone, and that is zone of excellence. That is when you're doing things that you're really good at. It's probably still not the best place for you to be spending your time and effort, but you're really good at it. So when you're building a company and you're wearing lots of hats, there comes a time when you're still doing things. So maybe you started to delegate certain things, cleaning the office, driving and go picking up supplies, things like that. You started to delegate some of those things, but you're still doing things that, whether it's writing reports or writing bids or some executive assistant type duties that, going through and combing all your emails, scheduling all your reports. So there's things that you can do that you're really good at, but it's probably not where you're adding the most value to the company. And you also are very aware of how much time you're spending on it. If you say, I'm going to do this to 5 o'clock, you're kind of watching your watch. And at 5 o'clock, you're like, okay, I need to be done. Then there's the zone of genius. And the zone of genius is the things that you just absolutely positively love to do. If you won the lottery and still needed to work, those are the kinds of things you would choose to do. It's the kind of things that you say, okay, I'm going to do this till 5 o'clock. And all of a sudden you look down and it's 6:30. You just lost track of time. And it's the things you love to do, and your customers love you to be doing, and your employees love you to be doing, because it's where you shine. It's where you add the most value. And so recognizing some of the things that we need to do to take things off our plate so that we can focus on our zone of genius, where we add the most value, that's where we're going to grow the company the most. And so when we can make the hires that allow us to really scale, it's getting an executive assistant. If you're not a money person, getting a really strong financial person to the degree that your company needs. sometimes you need a bookkeeper, sometimes you need a controller, sometimes you need a chief financial officer. It really depends on the size of the dollars you're talking about. And sometimes you can bring a fractional CFO in, before you really can justify a full-time CFO, you bring someone in part-time. They're a CFO for a half a dozen different companies, and they're giving you very high-level financial guidance, but you're not bearing the burden of their whole salary. And then, chief operating officers, getting things off your plate, having someone that is really good at dotting the I's and crossing the T's and following, putting policies and procedures in place and supporting your team to be able to execute on those, pulls those things off our plates as visionary entrepreneurs and allows us to focus on, seeing what is around the corner in our industry. How can we innovate what we're doing to really build our business? How can we maybe narrow our focus so we're really the experts in certain niches, whatever that is? Those are the visionary type of things, and let someone else run the day-to-day business. The way that I believe we can grow and scale when we're able to do that is just off the charts.
I agree. I think that makes the most sense. In finding those people and choosing those right people. I think it's critical to getting you free to do what you do. And you're also empowering them to do what they're good at too. Like the bookkeeper, the last thing they want to do is sales. Sales guy, last thing he wants to do is bookkeeping.
Right.
So let them do what they like to do and excel in their zone of genius too.
Yeah.
So I don't want to let you leave without asking you about executive education through EO, because that's, joining EO, huge fan. I'm in EO. I love EO. I try to talk all my friends into joining EO. But then when you talk about the executive education, what is that, and how do it's one of those things when for me, I want to do it just because everybody that I know has done it just says it's great. But what about it is it that brought you to be so involved in it?
Yeah, great question. So I originally was applied to be in the class of 2004. So in other words, you apply in in 2001 or two, and it's a 3-year program for the Entrepreneurial Masters Program. And I didn't get in, so I applied again the next year, and I got in that year. And it's a 3-year program. It's 4 days each year, 3 years in a row. And the program really, you're exposed to 9 to 10 speakers each year, 3 years in a row. So anywhere from 27 to 30 thought leaders are who you're exposed to. And really what happens is we don't bring in professors who are teaching theory. We bring in people who are successful in business and share something that they believe was key to their success. And they share that with us. So you're hearing from other business owners. You're hearing from thought leaders from around the world in the entrepreneurial space who have been there, they've done it, and they share their experience with us. So I graduated from that program in the class of 2005. A year later, the founder of VO and the founder of what was called Birthing the Giants is now the Entrepreneurial Masters Program, was Vern Harnish. He decided he was going to step away from running that program, and I was one of the people they asked, would you step in and lead this program? So since I started in 2007 with a class, and so since 2007 I've been one of the facilitators of the Entrepreneurial Masters Program. And what we do, we focus on what we've coined the 5 pillars of entrepreneurial learning, which is people, strategy, execution, cash, and leadership. People is recruiting and hiring and retaining top talent. And then the value of building a really strong culture in your company. Strategies around strategic planning. So it's not business plans. Business plans are usually for external groups, funding sources, where strategic plan is for internally, for your own team, of what do we need to do to get where we want to go. Execution is kind of what you would think it is. Cash is both the acquiring of and managing of cash. The acquiring is sales and marketing. Managing of cash is cash flow management, maximizing the value of your business and acquiring other companies, mergers, acquisitions. Then leadership is around personal leadership, recognizing the importance of living a life of integrity, really being an authentic leader. And we kind of bring in people who are really have lived leadership. And one guy that starts the program worked with President Reagan. The guy who ends the program is a guy named Warren Rustan. He worked with President Ford. So just really strong leaders. And it's 65 to 68 entrepreneurs from around the world. And when I am bringing on a speaker, I say, you have 2.5 hours. Recognize I'd like you to tee up your expertise content for about an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours of that. I need you to leave at least a half hour to 45 minutes for the class to challenge you on what you're asserting, because they're going to challenge you. They're going to challenge each other. They're going to share ideas with each other. And so what's really brilliant about that program is not only do you learn how people in other industries approach issues or challenges or problems, you learn how people from around the world, different cultures. And that's when paradigm shifts occur. It starts to get you to think differently and think bigger. And so when you bring that back to your business, it allows you to really help your team start to see things differently. And I would say that's the one program that certainly changed my business the most. It really got me thinking about how to implement things. And so each year you come back for 3 years in a row and you build on what you had done from the year before. And it's really some powerful programs.
And they do them around the world. I mean, it's in multiple places.
So the Entrepreneurial Masters Program is based in Boston,
okay.
And that's the same place. There was a key executive program that EO has decided not to pursue any further. It's been in place for 10 years. So quite honestly, the guy who I started that program 10 years ago, and then after 1 year, I handed it over to a guy named Barrett Ursick out of Philadelphia. And he basically took what I did. And, when I started it, we were desperate to try to fill a class. Now, since he's taken it over and built it, the program sells out in like an hour. But EO decided to forego that program going forward. So Barrett and I are actually teaming up to offer the key executive program to EO regions, around the world. And the beauty of this, Chad, is, we as entrepreneurs go and we learn all these things and we come back and try to get our team excited about them, and they weren't there to hear it. So when what happens is you as the entrepreneur go, but you can bring up the 4 people from your leadership team. So you have your marketing person, your finance person, your operations person, and yourself, and you're listening to the same content at the same time. And then you each hear it from a little differently. You each hear it from the perch that you sit on in the company. And then we give time after each speaker, while the speaker's still there, for that team to say, okay, what did you hear? What do we think we could bring into our company, and how could we implement this best? Well, you all have your key leaders there doing that. And it's a transformative program. So we're really excited to start to bring that to regions.
Gosh, that sounds fantastic. If you need some help, let me know.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time. My goodness, this has been fantastic. I really do appreciate it. And, like I said, it's, talking about EO, you can spend a ton of time talking about EO and the value of it. Obviously, it's a great way to do it. And now you said you're doing leadership coaching, and then I guess, I don't know where you're finding the time to do anything extra with EO, but it seems like you're pretty deep into it.
It's interesting. I've been in for almost 21 years. If you ask my wife and my adult children what one of the best decisions I've ever made in my adult life, they will tell you joining EO. Certainly, it's helped me build a better business and a bigger business. And I'm on my 3rd business now. But what I learned is EO understands the entirety of an entrepreneur, that it's not just what we do for a living. It's also kind of how we live life. It's how we show up in our families. It's how we show up in our friendships. It's kind of how we show up in the community. It's how we drive down the street and there's some problem with construction going on and everyone's complaining, but we may complain for a second or two, but then our mind kicks into, there's got to be a better way. And this is kind of how we think. And so what's really happened along the way is I've learned to be a better husband, a better, more present father. And so, and a better friend. And so it's more than just about building a better business. It's about building a better life for me. And I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I've had along the way to really learn and grow.
No, and I appreciate that because I grew up and as I was growing up for a long time, the last thing I wanted was my own company. But I had my own company, and I didn't want my children to have their own company. And then now, after EO, a different mindset, a different thing. I almost mandate that my kids will start their own company because it's just there's a lot of freedom to it. It doesn't have to be this miserable experience that you hear so many people lament. And I think getting around people who can enforce that and help you look at it that way is very important. I think it's hard to quantify what that is when you're trying to explain EO to somebody, but being around those people, you do think differently.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And, hopefully I'll be calling you up again for another call at some point in time and kind of check in and see what you've built next.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
That would be great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Get the Intel. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.